Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. Tonight, I have a horrific and still developing story to share with you. And it's one that I fear many Canadians have missed. It involves a mass casualty event that occurred just 2 days before Canada's federal election. At a time when our country's media attention was directed towards Ottawa and the subtly shifting election poll results, something horrifying happened at a Vancouver Filipino community celebration. On a closed-to-traffic street that was lined with food trucks serving Filipino cuisine to the crowd of concertgoers, a 30-year-old man driving a black SUV entered the closed street and accelerated into the crowd of pedestrians. The result is being described as Vancouver's darkest day. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, I'm going to take you along with me as I do my best to understand what happened, what events may have led up to it, and perhaps most importantly, what we can do to protect society against people who seek to do harm on innocent people. Our topic is the 2025 Vancouver vehicle attack that led to the tragedy at the Lapu Lapu Day Festival.
This is the darkest day in our city's history.
A growing memorial in East Vancouver at the site of an unprecedented tragedy where a vehicle plowed into a crowd of festival goers Saturday evening.
Vancouver police say 11 people are dead, ranging in age from 5 to 65 years old. The death toll could rise with dozens more injured. So far, 30-year-old Kai G. Adam Low is facing 8 murder charges.
To start our discussion here, let's learn a little bit about Lapu Lapu Day. If, like me, you were unfamiliar with this event, Lapu Lapu Day is a celebration named after a historical Filipino leader, and the day is meant to celebrate Filipino pride, community, respect, and independence. Back in 2023, British Columbia became the first Canadian province to officially declare April 26th Lapu Lapu Day. And 1 year later, the province's largest city, Vancouver, successfully held its first annual Lapu Lapu Day festival, and the event was a massive success. To give a sense of the Lapu Lapu Day festival and its block party, let's listen to this short excerpt from CBC's coverage of last year's inaugural Lapu Lapu Day festival.
Music, dancing, food, and traditional outfits. Hundreds gathering to honor Filipino hero Lapu Lapu, who led the Philippines in resistance against Spanish colonizers on this day in the 1500s. Organizers say the day symbolizes independence from colonial rule and celebrates Filipino culture.
Lapu Lapu Day has not been celebrated in North America at this scope and scale.
And a big part of the culture is the food.
Barbecues, spring rolls. This one is from my dad's recipe since back home.
The celebration included a basketball tournament from a local all-Filipino league, Batang Pinoy. The province proclaimed April 27th as Lapu Lapu Day for the first time last year. This year, the city of Vancouver acknowledging it for the first time, an important milestone for many Filipinos in BC.
The realization of a lot of young Filipinos as they're growing up to want to rediscover and reconnect with their identity has been critical and important in a lot of the conversations we're having.
Organizers hope Saturday's event will mark the first of many Lapu Lapu Day celebrations in the city.
So as you just heard, it was a peaceful community event celebrating Filipino culture, community, and food. And I will say some of the food shown in those news clips looked amazing, but I digress. I also want to make this clear, Lapu Lapu Day isn't one of those politically charged events burdened by ideological disagreements or some kind of foreign conflict. In fact, Lapu Lapu Day doesn't feel much different than a small town's Canada Day celebration. It's a peaceful, family-friendly celebration. In fact, it's been said that the Lapu Lapu Day festival we just heard about didn't require one single call to Vancouver police. And also, as you may have heard in the clip, it was a success and it was planned to be the first of many celebrations. The success and the safety of that first celebration is going to come with a tragic side effect that's going to be more clear as we get going. So with that introduction out of the way, let's jump forward a year and bring us to April 26th of 2025. Vancouver was holding its second annual Lapu Lapu Day Festival, or as the organizers were referring to it, as a block party. The event was going to be a day-long party running from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. and being held in the fenced-off grounds of the John Oliver Secondary School in South Vancouver. The block party was billed as an unforgettable day of culture, community, and music, and it would feature local artisans, food vendors, and a variety of performances. The marketing material for the event also unsettlingly states that the event was going to end with a bang, referring, of course, to the party's headlining performance by Apple Diap of the hit pop group, the Black Eyed Peas. Now, the day, the festival, and the performance, everything went as expected, just like it did last year. But tragedy was quite literally speeding towards the festival just after its 8 p.m. wind down. To understand what happened, I need to spend a bit more time describing the lay of the land for the party. The main festival, like the concert and performances in the dance area, were all in the school's field, which is surrounded by a large fence and of course is an area that vehicles can't get access to. But just outside of the field, a section of Fraser Street was converted into a sort of food truck marketplace. The street was of course closed to traffic and there were large signs on wooden barriers explaining so on each end. Then, on Fraser Street, food trucks lined each side of the street with patrons filling the closed-off street. So in essence, it was like a long corridor with food trucks on each side of the street. And this is the area where tragedy was about to strike. Just at 8 p.m., as the Black Eyed Peas members wrapped up their performance and the crowd of attendees were thanked for another great event, people began to disperse. And of course, many stopped to grab a bite to eat on their way out. Hundreds of people were on Fraser Street, either grabbing food, assisting the departing crowds, closing down their shops, or just walking home from an up until now successful Lapu Lapu Day block party. So with the scene now set, let's get into what went tragically wrong. As the episode continues, we're going to trace the origins of this tragedy back much further, but speaking specifically about the events of April 26th, we're going to be focusing on a black Audi SUV. Earlier in the day, just at about 1 p.m., and about a 20-minute drive from this block party, a very similar vehicle was involved in a near head-on collision as it erratically changed lanes into oncoming traffic. Coincidentally, the vehicle involved in that near miss posted dashcam footage of this incident online.
Almost a full-on head collision. This guy. Do you see that?
As he posted the video, the author, Chris Cavill, asks the question, is this the same car from that horrendous Vancouver incident tonight? He almost killed my 2-year-old and I. If I hadn't seen him coming, I dread to think what would have happened. He then tags the Vancouver police and offers to send them a higher quality version of his video. If anyone took him up on it, or if this was determined to even be related to what was about to happen at the block party, we don't know, as at the time of me posting this episode, this video hasn't been referenced by the police or the media to my knowledge. But what has been discussed in depth is the actions of a nearly identical vehicle back at the block party. So let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll catch up with the black SUV and the departing concertgoers. Now I'm just going to jump right back into the story. We're just a few short hours after that near-miss collision we just heard about. It's about 8 p.m., the headlining concert had just ended, and the crowds are dispersing the block party. The food truck area on Fraser Street is now cluttered with hundreds of people, and Vancouver's darkest day is about to begin. I'm going to do my best to collect witness accounts of what happened and how. So first, let's hear the account of a man who lived next to the blocked-off street. He described seeing a black SUV being driven erratically just outside his home.
We thought this was strange. It's very reckless to be driving so fast when there are so many people around.
One neighbor was walking back from the grocery store when he saw the SUV turn onto his block.
He turned left onto our street and started driving down this way, but very immediately he made a U-turn.
The SUV parked off-street, and then a minute later, tragedy struck.
The man you just heard was just behind the wooden barricade that closed Fraser Street to traffic. And what he described as a black SUV speeding down his street, doing a U-turn, and parking the vehicle on the side of the road, pointing towards the food truck area. Next, let's hear from an eyewitness named Bjorn, who appeared on Global News after the incident. Bjorn was witness to that black SUV as it first passed the vehicle barricade and began its attack on unsuspecting pedestrians.
And then I heard this banging sounds that I can't imagine. I've seen people flying, one or two, right in front of me, like 7 feet away from me. And then I thought it was just like a pure, car accident, but it was not. He accelerated again, 2 to 3, food trucks. I've seen my people flying. There was one lady being twisted, and then he accelerated again.
Next, we can travel a bit further down the corridor on Fraser Street and hear from a pair of witnesses who were working in a food truck. When they first heard a loud bang, they feared another vendor's propane tank may have exploded. But when they looked out their customer serving window, what they saw was far worse.
I heard a loud bang.
Bang, bang, bang.
Boom, boom, boom.
And I saw the car pass by. I said, what the hell?
Taste of Malaysia was just wrapping up after the Lapu Lapu festival when a black Audi SUV came barreling through a large crowd.
Yeah, then we see from the window, we see all over the body lying down. People screaming.
We look at the window, there's a body.
Yeah.
Her body was lying on the ground.
Yeah.
We saw her leg and her arm, she wasn't moving. We know she's already dead. And then they tried to go back at the back door and there's another
we
body.
Saw another body lying
at
down.
the back of our truck. And then
people injured.
And then we saw people at the back of our truck. They were like really injured, and one guy was like holding his leg.
That black speeding SUV would continue its path of destruction the entire length of the food truck market before suddenly coming to a stop. The impacts, with mainly pedestrians, were so severe that at the time the vehicle stopped, its entire front end was peeled back onto itself, its airbags were deployed, and automotive fluids leaked onto the ground. And almost as quickly as it all happened, the realization of what just occurred began to kick in. It's difficult to describe the horrors that played out in the vehicle's paths, but without exaggerating at all, it looked like a war zone. Pieces of the car and a million other unidentified things covered the streets. The bodies of the victims were scattered one after another, and the survivors were all just doing what they could to help. I discourage anyone from looking up the many videos circulating of the crime scene, but to give a sense of what happened, here's some audio filmed by an eyewitness just after the car passed.
Sir, can you hear me? Oh my gosh!
I just have to say, those panicked sounds don't do the horrors justice. But as survivors are doing what they can while awaiting the arrival of first responders, an equally shocking scene is playing out around the now stopped car. A group of survivors and some of the event's security guards pull the driver out of the SUV and hold him against a fence while awaiting the police. Video of the group of men holding him against the fence was captured, and it's just bizarre. The driver, who's been identified as 30-year-old Kai G. Adam Lowe, just appears wide-eyed and confused. As he repeats, "I'm sorry," over and over, the angry crowd is shouting at him, while others are holding the angrier ones back.
That's him! That's him! You're going to say shit! He killed a 2-year-old kid?
Somewhat surprisingly, and perhaps a statement to the peaceful nature of the festival attendees, it seems the perpetrator wasn't harmed. He was held against a fence and protected up until the point that the police arrived and took him into custody. Initially, the number of casualties, injuries, and details of the perpetrator were uncertain. But to the credit of the Vancouver police, their communication throughout the aftermath of this attack has been pretty good. Throughout the night, as the investigation unfolded and the victims were treated at multiple hospitals, the true number of fatalities and details of the perpetrator and any possible motive were all left to speculation. But the following morning, on Sunday, April 27th, a Vancouver police press conference answered many of those questions. Let's listen into an excerpt from it.
This is the darkest day in our city's history. Last night, as thousands of members of Vancouver's Filipino community gathered for an important cultural celebration, the actions of a single person shattered our collective sense of safety. There are now 11 confirmed fatalities. We believe dozens more are injured, some seriously, and the number of dead could rise in the coming days or weeks. The driver of the vehicle was the lone occupant and he was arrested at the crime scene by members of the Vancouver Police Department after bystanders and witnesses intervened to detain him. He remains in custody. While I'm not prepared to speak about the potential motive, I can now say with confidence that the evidence in this case does not lead us to believe this was an act of terrorism. I can also tell you that the person we have in custody does have a significant history of interactions with police related to mental health.
So in total, at the time of releasing this episode, there's been roughly 20 injuries with 11 fatalities, and with victims ranging in age from 5 years old to 65 years old. That makes this Canada's worst vehicle ramming attack, equaling the total losses related to the 2018 Toronto van attack that I also covered on Nighttime. But also, like many stories I covered on Nighttime, the perpetrator in this case had a history of interactions with law enforcement and healthcare providers related to serious mental health issues. And that adds an additional layer to all this. In fact, you're probably going to notice some similarities to this case and that of the Elliot Chorney story out of Nova Scotia that I covered in a series of episodes last month. The perpetrator of the Vancouver attack was referred to by the Premier of British Columbia as being profoundly ill, and it's since been revealed that the perpetrator, Kai G. Adam Low, had an interaction with the police on April 25th, one day before this tragedy. But details about that incident have yet to be revealed, with the exception of confirming that it didn't result in hospitalization. And to make the potential red flags even a bit more apparent, a Post-Media article published that a family member had contacted a hospital psych ward just hours before Sunday's attack because its perpetrator, Kai G. Adam Low, had a deteriorating mental health condition, was suffering from delusions, and was paranoid. But again, it's not known what action, if any, was taken. So now that we have a good idea of what happened, who did it, and the opinion that it's likely related to mental health, there's still a whole bunch more to get into. Let's take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to discuss some tragic and traumatic events that played out in the perpetrator's family over the past year. And then we'll talk about the steps taken, or in this case not taken, to prevent gathering crowds from falling victim to vehicle rammings. We're going to get into all that after a short break. So at this point in our story, I want to back up a bit and learn a bit more about the perpetrator of this attack, Kai G. Adam Low. As we heard described previously, he had a long history of mental health-related troubles, and I can only assume that they had been agitated considerably as a result of some events that rocked his family in 2024. Let's go back to January 28th of 2024 and hear a short global news report covering Vancouver's first homicide of the year. The victim, Alexander Low, is the older brother of Kai G. Low, the man driving the black SUV.
Flowers placed outside this East Vancouver home where a man was murdered.
Surreal. Just been hard to process it.
Vancouver police say in the early morning hours of January 28th, the man was found dead on the floor of this home on Henry Street near East 33rd Avenue. Police identified the victim as 31-year-old Alexander Low.
That's wretched.
Paul Forehand says he's shocked by what happened, remembering his friend as a caring person.
He was a kind soul. He's very good sense of humor. Wouldn't hurt a fly.
A 39-year-old man was arrested at the home. Dwight Williams Kamach has now been charged with second-degree murder and remains in jail.
The cause of death is still under investigation, as well as what the motive was, what the relationship was.
Forehand says he doesn't know how Low knew the suspect. He talked to Low that weekend, and nothing seemed amiss. The homicide unit continues to investigate. An online fundraiser has now been launched to help Low's family pay for funeral expenses and ensure a dignified farewell.
They're crushed. The mother's distraught. The brother's shot himself.
The murder of Alex Low happened just over a year ago and was said to have had a profound effect on his younger brother, Kai G. Adam Low. In fact, he said so himself. In a post made to the GoFundMe campaign benefiting the funeral of Alex Low, younger brother Kai G stated, "It pains me deeply to put these words down, but my brother has been taken from us in a senseless act of violence, something that we never saw coming. Our reality has shifted abruptly, and despite our disagreements, the harsh truth is that he's no longer with us, and it hits me with an overwhelming force. So I think it's fair to say, and probably understandable, that a traumatic event could impact an already unwell person. But the fallout of Alex's murder would bring additional trauma Kai-Ji's way. The GoFundMe, after successfully raising the funds related to the funeral expenses, was updated by Kai-Ji Adam Low because of a second event only months later in August of 2024. When seeking additional funds, he stated, "The unimaginable grief brought upon my mother is something that is worse than my own sadness, for she brought him into this world only for him to leave so abruptly. It is a sadness we can't begin to express. She lost a son already and is on the verge of losing her home, and this has driven her to attempt to take her own life." And he goes on to explain that additional funding is needed due to her extended hospital stay as a result of this. Now, getting back to the vehicle ramming, at the time of it, Kai-Ji Adam Low lived with his mother, so it's reasonable to think that he was left largely in the care of another unwell person, which makes the many mental health-involved police interactions all the more telling. Like other cases we've covered before, I'm left wondering what needs to happen short of a homicidal act to get someone the help they need and protect the public from the many Kai-Ji Adam Lows, Elliot Chorneys, Rohini Bisasars, and Vince Lees. But that said, there's still so much we don't know about Kai-Ji Low's story that it's not yet the time to point fingers about why he was left in a position that enabled him to race a black SUV into a crowd of people leaving a concert. But I'm sure that info is going to come out in the days and weeks ahead. And much like the cases I referenced just moments ago, I'm sure the policymakers' critics will notice a series of red flags that leads up to the Vancouver vehicle ramming. And that brings us to another element to touch on. Many people are unfamiliar with the phenomenon of vehicle ramming attacks. If you're one of them, vehicle rammings or vehicle-as-a-weapon incidents are assaults where someone purposefully drives a vehicle into people, vehicles, or buildings to cause harm. Like any type of violent crime, vehicle rammings can occur for a variety of reasons. Some are motivated by extremist beliefs, such as the incel-motivated Toronto van attack that killed 11 people back in 2018. Other attacks are motivated by anger or mental health issues or personal problems. In some cases, the attacker wants to cause fear or make a statement. An example of that would be the 2021 hate-motivated vehicle ramming that occurred in London, Ontario, and killed 4 members of a Muslim family. One of the things that makes these attacks so horrific is that they can happen very quickly and without warning. Because cars and trucks are easy to access, they don't raise suspicions, and they're free to be used by attackers who might not have access to other weapons. To help lower the risk of vehicle ramming attacks, several steps can be taken. Cities often install barriers or bollards in busy pedestrian areas to stop vehicles from getting too close, or events that draw large crowds can use temporary barriers, such as large vehicles being parked in a roadway or temporary concrete dividers being used to block streets. The lack of any physical barriers around the Lapu Lapu Days food truck area has already become a talking point. Remember earlier in the episode, we heard how last year's festival was a complete success with not a single call to Vancouver police? Well, an unfortunate side effect of that seems to have popped up in the city's risk assessment of the event.
Among the many questions still unanswered in the wake of this weekend's mass casualty event is how the victims were left so vulnerable to a speeding vehicle and its driver on an otherwise quiet side street in South Vancouver.
We can't predict one-offs, and we certainly don't want to create a police state.
And it's a question Vancouver police and the city's mayor insist had a simple explanation that seemed to make sense until Saturday.
So last year there were 0 interactions with police at this festival. It was a family-friendly cultural celebration involving kids. And we wanted to maintain that based on that information and that threat assessment. We don't want to cage everybody up at every event in the city of Vancouver.
Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim announcing Sunday he's launched a review into how the city secures all events going forward.
I've directed a full review of our event safety measures, including barriers, traffic control, and safety protocols.
Those barriers, blocking access to so-called soft targets, have become all too familiar to British Columbians at large events over the years. Dump trucks, cruisers, and other blockades, utilized at roughly 8 of the more than 2,000 events held across the city every year. From Western Canada's largest pride parade to cultural celebrations like Vaisakhi, and at major events drawing massive crowds like the Taylor Swift concert, something we now know could have saved lives here on Saturday, even though by all accounts there was no indication it was ever needed.
So as you can see, many questions remain unanswered in this tragic story. We have questions about the perpetrator's mental health intervention or lack thereof, the motivation, if any, is still part of the police investigation, as are any details related to potential planning or premeditation. A full review of the risk assessment will eventually become public, but it seems that if we have maniacs with homicidal intentions running wild around us, all the barriers in the world can't keep us safe. It's like that age-old adage, an ounce of protection is worth a pound of cure. And perhaps the last unanswered question, and one that words could likely never answer, concerns the pain and trauma that surrounds the victims, their loved ones, the witnesses, and the community in general. Slowly their stories are being told, and they simply seem too horrible to even be real. Just as I'm preparing this episode, a GoFundMe campaign was just launched to support the family of the youngest victim. A 5-year-old girl and her parents were killed. Her 16-year-old brother, Andy Lee, is the family's sole survivor, as he decided to stay home to finish his homework instead of attending the festival.
16-year-old Andy Lee paying tribute at the place where his father, stepmother, and sister all lost their lives.
We just told him that we are always going to be there for him.
Tone Lee says Andy stayed home to finish his homework while his family went to the Lapu Lapu Day festival.
I think he's still processing everything. He's a teenager and his life pretty much changed overnight.
Lee describes his brother Richard as a dedicated community leader, Lin Huang a loving mother, and 5-year-old Katie as the life of the party. On Monday, Vancouver police shared the fatalities include 9 females and 2 males. They have confirmed all but 1 victim lived in Metro Vancouver. Police say they are taking a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach and will not yet be sharing their identities.
If anyone out there is interested in supporting this family, I've added a link to the GoFundMe in this episode's description. And sadly, I imagine many more links will be added as the families of the other victims too struggle to fund the unexpected funeral costs. I want to thank you for joining me for this episode of Nighttime. Before I end this episode, I want to express my deepest sympathies to everyone affected by this tragic event at the Lapu Lapu Day Festival in Vancouver. To the families who lost loved ones, to those who were injured, and to all who were present and forever changed by what happened, my thoughts are with you. I think it's quite obvious, but this is a quickly developing story, and much more is about to surface. I'm going to do my best to provide an update episode if there are any significant developments. As well, I'm also preparing an upcoming episode that will specifically explore the broader phenomenon of vehicle ramming attacks. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part here, I want to give some thanks. First, a big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Lisa, Stacy, and Blaze, we appreciate you. And if anyone else would like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on this episode, or submit a question or comment to be aired in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I look forward to hearing from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.